I would love to welcome you, Andrew, here with us today on the Elders Speak forum here on YouTube, where we are discussing the Exodus interviews, or interviews with people who have wisdom, like yourself, about leaving spiritual communities, insight into spiritual teachers and teachings. And so I just want to thank you so much for being here and sharing in this way.
Well, I look forward to it, and thank you very much for inviting me. I think this is a wonderful opportunity to help people understand what is a bit of a mystery indeed, and people like yourself with experiences of teachers, and we do need to come to an understanding. The Western mind needs to come to an understanding, particularly those traditions influenced by by the East. Yes, so excellent.
So, Andrew, what has been your experience? What has been your background in the spiritual realm?
Well, I think I was born spiritual, and so my early background was, of course, the Christian church, and going to British schools that were Christian foundations. My secondary school, for example, was founded in 711. So it's been going right beside an abbey. It was the teaching school belonging to the abbey, and it's now one of the premier schools in the UK. And so the church and everything that it stands for, the high Anglican, as we called it, not quite Catholic, but higher than Anglican, was my tradition. Lots of choir singing, lots of services, going to church every morning, and twice on Sunday, and singing in the school chapel, and praying in the school chapel in the big abbey next door. So being steeped in the tradition, and you know, when you think that my school was founded closer to the time that Jesus was born than closer to my birth, I mean, it is an extraordinary thought in that sense. So, and the mystery and the magic was still very much alive, and for somebody as sensitive as me, particularly so. So I got an early dose of it, and I would like to, whereas everybody else would rush out of the church after it was all finished, I used to like to sit in there and absorb the energies. And I didn't know why, I didn't know what was happening, I didn't know what this was all about. And I certainly never labeled it. And I discovered that I was good at religious studies at school, and I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the stories, I enjoyed the power. And it seemed to me to be, the Christian story seemed to bring an ethos to a sort of discipline that I could understand, because I simply couldn't understand the discipline that was being imposed by my school, which was very rigid, and by my parents, which was arbitrary, and which so on. So it was something that was easy to understand, and in those days too, because it was just after the war, there was a lot of army discipline in the background too. So we were quite used to that, to being disciplined, to doing what we were told. And there was some comfort in that. And one trusted the authority, and the authority seemed to be trustworthy. So those were good influences: family, army, and the school and the religious teachings. So that was the start of it. And I suppose as I grew older, I became somewhat influential within the church itself. And by the time I was married, 26, I was a member of the Synod, which was the leading council of the Church of England, and for the southeast of the country. And I'd spent a lot of time working at the local church and was church councillor and so on and so forth. So I took it on. I took it was very serious. And then my next, I think the breakthrough came when we were certainly, my wife and I were certainly looking for something perhaps broader, or something that encompassed, or something that allowed us to understand the wider world religions. Because as we had spent a lot of both our childhoods were spent in different countries. Myself in France and Germany, and my wife, although British, was born in Palestine, was born in Morocco and grew up in Palestine before it became Israel. And we brought an unusual mixture of understandings of things that were foreign. And so it was not surprising, really, when I was sent to Africa, to East Africa, to run a company there in my early 30s. And there we came across our first spiritual teacher, if you like, who was another expatriate like me. He was an engineer, he's German, and he was a yoga teacher before anybody knew, in the days before anybody knew what yoga was or even heard of it. And so a small group of us would meet on the beach every Monday evenings and in the moonlight, and he would teach us, he and his wife would teach us yoga, and he was very, very good indeed. He'd learned from one of India's leading teachers and had been the poster boy in that teacher's book, one of the first yoga books written in German. And so Bernd von Keyserlingk was his name, and he understood the very nature of yoga and the yoga discipline, and he practiced it and lived it and so on, and taught it to us. And we had a lot of fun. And after we'd done our meditations in the evenings, we sat on the beach and drank wine together, and ended the evening very pleasantly in this way. And of course, meanwhile, we had plenty of servants to look after the children, and that was the sort of life. And then, of course, there was the interest in studying what was going, the shamanism, which was being practiced locally in East Africa and so on. And once the doors had opened into the world, into the yogic world, we wanted to find out more about this. What was Hinduism? What did it consist of? And so it wasn't long before we were deep into the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita, all the traditional texts upon which Hinduism is based. So where did this all come from? And so we became familiar with the gods and the discussions and the generalities of being those things. And my next posting, my company sent me to Canada, and my wife decided to do a degree in world religions. And then this deepened our understanding, and I tried to attend the courses in the evening that I could. So I attended comparative yoga course, which was a degree course in the world religions. And she also, as well as studying world religions and bringing that stuff home, which we would then discuss and so on. And in addition to that, she learned Sanskrit because she was determined, as a linguist herself, she was determined to try and understand what was behind, what was the very meaning, the core, the original meaning of the Vedas and the sutras and things like this. So our interest doubled and deepened, and then she won a scholarship to go to India for 8 weeks. And so that even made the experience more and more profound for us. And then we went to, I ran a few companies in Jamaica for a while. And so there was a complete break again, meeting the Rasta tradition and seeing something absolutely brand new and trying not to practice it because we were never really allowed in, but at least observing it and so on. And then back to Canada, at which time we ran into the Val Morin and the teaching of the Shivananda Ashram. You may have heard of that, just north of Montreal. Vishnu Devananda founded that in 1974, and I suppose it was just a year or two after that that we got to know him and the ashram as it was starting. And at the same time, we were very blessed to come across Father John Main in Montreal, who was Catholic priest and been invited by the a Catholic bishop in Montreal, the Bishop of Montreal, had invited this British priest, Father John Main, to come from Britain in order to start a movement of Christian meditation. And the Christianity sort of felt it was being left behind already by this. What is this meditation thing? You know, we have contemplation in Christianity, but that's more a question of taking a line of text and perhaps studying it, its full meaning with eyes closed, or contemplation, thinking about the saints or whatever, or the story of Jesus and deepening. But the next step from contemplation clearly is meditation, when one allows oneself to go into something and puts one's trust in something else. And traditionally, Christianity has always believed that meditation is the space in which you let the devil enter. So Christianity had blocked it out. So here was Father John Main now, and encouraged by the bishop to start the whole process of Christian meditation. So we took that on board as well, and that was very nice to sort of see the knitting together of the two. And I think after that, our next major teacher was Amrit Desai in Kripalu in the States, Massachusetts. He just opened the huge teaching center there, and for Kripalu Yoga, and that was being developed at 100 miles an hour. And we both became qualified as Kripalu teachers there, and were going down twice a year as my work and could permit, and so on, and spent a lot of time there. And my son came, and so on, and so that was a very, very profound opening, because he had developed a very, very compassionate form of Hinduism, and an extremely disciplined yoga, hatha yoga process, and also teaching about all the 8 limbs of yoga as well. So it made sense. He put the whole thing together in a wonderful package that made complete sense. And a very authoritative, very charismatic teacher. And it was excellent. And I still believe today that Kripalu yoga, hatha yoga itself, is probably the best system in the world. And he had defined the postures, and they made a lot of sense. After him, I do have a little crib sheet here, because my memory sometimes gives me a bit of a lack. So Amrit Desai, yes, and we became friends with him. And one of the other people who had founded the whole thing with him moved to Canada, and became Leela Osterman. She was, I think, Canada's first yoga teacher. Just after the war, she started teaching yoga in Toronto. Yes, so then we moved to, oh yes, what came next? Yes, it was really after I retired. We discovered Agama yoga in Thailand, and that was just being Swami Vivekananda was just starting that up, and he had been teaching in India and had moved to Thailand and wanted to open a yoga school, and that subsequently became, probably still today, was anyway until a few years ago, the largest teaching school in the world, and it was in a single place with schools around the world. And his benefit to the world really was to teach yoga and spiritual practice within a very, very broad context. So he was a major teacher, so that he brought many influences, much understanding of the traditions of not only the yogic tradition, but also interwove with that Buddhism and so on. And he structured the courses so that there were 24 levels, and then a further 12. And by level 3, you were fully qualified as a teacher. So you can imagine that each level was a month's training. So by the time to become a teacher there, the teacher training course, which my wife took, was about 1,000 hours. So much more intense than anything now offered in 200-hour teacher trainers and so on and so forth. So, and he as a leader was a teacher, and he was extremely good at them. So then I think after that, we were encouraged by one of the other senior teachers who said, well, I think you've graduated from doing that. So I think it's time to try something else. So, this was a fellow by the name of Basu, and a Danish fellow. And he said, come to India now. So it was time to try Kriya yoga in India. And so when I say try, I want you to fully understand that this wasn't just a sampling exercise. We were diving completely and utterly into every one of these things. We were taking them on completely, thoroughly. And we'll come back in a moment to the difference between the teachers and to answer the very questions that you had. But I think there are some truths to be had out of my tale. This is not just a tale about me, it's a tale about teachers, right? And so we then moved to the Kriya yoga in Rishikesh, Swami Shankarananda. And that's a form of yoga just based on meditation and really the empowering the chakras. So chakra-based meditation. So there's empowering this. Then we went back to Thailand for a bit, and you understand that these years I am fully retired, that I'm talking about over the last 20 years since I retired. And and then we went up to the north of Thailand and studied under Ajahn Tong, the Venerable Ajahn Tong, Vipassana meditation in the Buddhist tradition. And along the way, too, in some years earlier that I didn't mention, we had acquired a Tibetan son who was a Rinpoche, and he was Lama Lanang, and he then became a Rinpoche. So he is a teacher, and he lives in San Diego now. And so when he first arrived in the States and started teaching, I met him in Mexico, and I was very, very concerned that he was sort of being abused by people who were dragging him round because he was robed and attractive and so on and so forth. And so I was trying to take some sort of a fatherly interest in saying, hey, you need a bit of a direction, son. This is your message is valuable, but I can see you being drawn off here and there by all sorts of people who might want to make a lot of money out of you, So he just simply said to me, do you want to be my daddy? So I said to my wife, what do you think? And she said, yes, let's do it. So dear Lama Lanang, and so there we are. There's another one. So we got interested in that in the Buddhist teaching, and then in Thailand, in the north of Thailand, we studied Vipassana under the Venerable Ajahn Tong, one of the most venerated teachers in the world. You understand how fortunate I am to have been exposed to some of the most vibrant and brilliant teachers of the last 50, 60 years. I mean, it's quite amazing. And so I'm very, 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 very pleased that that's been my story. And a lot of these people too, we invited to come to Canada. We invited them to, amongst other places, to Wakefield, and they taught here as well. And because of my seniority, I suppose, in the world of work and so on, you find that powerful spiritual people are attracted to powerful other people, and so and it sort of works because one can ease the way and one's name is known, and so people will come either for them or for you or whatever. Well, if he's interested, there must be something in it. So it sort of works together, a bit like magic, but there's no money involved, I can tell you. By the time you paid for these guys' airfares and all the rest of it, and you've given them the rest. There's it's not a money-making exercise. So anyway, there we are. That's my experience of an array of teachers, all of them that I've been close to, and not just seen them on the edge of a pedestal. Not all. Ajahn Tong up in the north of Thailand, not so close, but the others very, very close. Yeah. And had the most wonderful. This isn't a question of shopping. This is a question of a journey, a pilgrimage, a very, very serious journey undertaken with a great deal of sincerity. And not so much wanting to discover the truth, because there is no such thing, but wanting to experience in order to share with others, in order to be able to guide others into what do you think is the best for me? Where should I go at this time of life? And that is very much reflected in the teaching that I do right now. So that was a long answer to question number one.
Thank you so much for that. That gives a very, a very wide picture of your background. And so in this life of exploration with many different kinds of teachers and perhaps even gurus, is there a difference to you in those two words, a spiritual teacher and a guru? And would you consider yourself a student of both?
As I say, yes. Well, to me, all the words, guru, swami, teacher, Shri, these are different levels of and should not be confused. A teacher is perhaps the most basic one of all, and you can have a yoga teacher who has done 200 hours of teaching, and that's it, 200 hours of study, and then becomes a yoga teacher, and there's a nice little certificate on the wall to prove it. And when you start asking them about the Eightfold Path or this or this or this, they don't know what you're talking about. They're saying, well, this is how you do the downward dog, and this is how you do the upward cat, this is how you do the sideways kangaroo, and so on. And because, in truth, of course, they don't realize that while they're making up these exotic names, well, now we're going to flap our wings like in what I call the butterfly pose. So we now do the butterfly pose. This comes from nowhere, except it's an exercise they develop for themselves. So we had to be very careful. There are teachers, and this comes to your question about lineage later on. So teacher can refer to somebody at that level, but it can also refer to somebody much more at a much higher level, who's done hundreds and hundreds of years, hundreds of hours, years of study, but still just calls himself, I'm just a teacher, and leaves it at that. The word Swami has become a little distorted, because Swami really means, in a sense, a venerable teacher. And Swami there's almost an exam. Traditionally in Hinduism, there are 12 families, and you know the names having hung around them, and they are the only ones who can give you a swamidom. You can become a swami, because they then give you their name, and you take their name, and you then can call yourself swami. Well, that used to come as a result of being with them, living in the families, worshipping with them, and following maybe a particular god, goddess, and so on, like Kali or whoever. And then you're finally given your robes, and you're allowed to call yourself Swami. And that too has changed, because Westerners who try hard enough and pay enough money can be given the title today and become called Swamis. So, or you can just call yourself a Swami. Who's going to stop you, you know? You call yourself doctor if you want to, but as long as you're not trying to take out somebody's appendix, you know, nobody's going to mind too much. So there we are, it's the same sort of thing. Guru, on the other hand, the next level up is something is very serious. Because a guru technically is somebody who's prepared to take on your life. And you are prepared to subject yourself entirely to that guru, to be guided. So the guru will say, you've been with me now for 5 years. I want you to go to New Zealand and study to become a doctor. What? Yes. And you do it, and you go and you do it because the guru told you to do that. So this is where you have put your life in the hands of a spiritual teacher, somebody that you trust, and somebody that you. And it takes a long time, really, for a Westerner to understand. This is my guru. This is somebody I will faithfully follow, and somebody who will give me enough time in a year to focus specifically on me. So there's your guru. And then above that are the highly, highly venerated, like Ramakrishna, people like the Sri, get the title SRI, Sri. But so for the most part, we're talking swamis, really. Gurus may tend to be more monastical, less, yeah. So yeah, there we are. And even the great teachers that we know did not call themselves guru. They didn't call themselves Sri. You know, they just call themselves Swami. So all the big traditions have been given to us by Swamis. Yes. So there's the difference between those. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, and you wanted to know the role? Yes, I think I hope that covers that. Yes, good.
Mm-hmm. 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 Absolutely, it does. Yes. You mentioned briefly there about lineage. So, in your experience, how important has lineage been for, I guess, your trust in the teachers you were learning from, or knowing that this information or these teachings were coming from a lineage? Have you seen teachers that also don't come from a lineage? And what has been your experience with that?
I think, if I may, probably the boldest thing I will say is that it's really important that a teacher comes from an identifiable lineage. And if you go online and you look at any of the leading schools, for example, almost the top of their website, it says our lineage. They want to get that out there clearly in front. What lineage do you follow? How do I understand you? So I'm a priest. I'm a Christian priest. Okay. Well, which lineage? Oh, I don't care about that sort of stuff. You know, I'm just Christian. You know? Well, people will say, no. Well, I want to know, which path am I going to go down? Am I going to be extreme? You know, am I going to be praising God through doing my hymn singing? You know, is this the Bhakti Yoga route, or am I going to be devoutly on my knees in deep meditation? You know, because that's also a Christian lineage. So I need to know that, because I need to know the way I'm going. Faced with this panoply of mystery to the Western eye that is Eastern religions, people just dive in and they don't really care. They don't know that that's important to ask that question. And they don't understand that the teaching, the coherence of the teaching, is also important. Because let's face it, teaching has to be coherent. It has to be understandable. It has to make sense. And while there are many, many different teachings, we know as we develop our understanding of the world that all teaching is an analogy. This is a metaphor. Reality, as we know, really doesn't exist. It's the lens through which we look at it that helps it to make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So at the simplest point, I can say that tree at the bottom of my garden, to me, it's where I write poetry. It's the most mystical and the magical tree in the world. I have had visions under that tree. I have done this and this and this. That tree is God manifested in the form of the poetic arts, to me, inspires me indefinitely. And the squirrel running up and down, what's the squirrel saying? The squirrel saying, well, this is my home, guy. And the bird comes along and says, no, this is where I find the ants. Ting, 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 ting. And the lumberjack coming down the hill says, that looks like 20,000 rolls of toilet paper. So what we're talking about, it's the eyes through which people see. So there has to be, we look at the world through a story. So it is, what is the story that's being told, which is and we need to know that. We need to know, oh, I'm a poet, therefore I'm likely to go this way. I will extol the virtues. I will join the poetry school that extols the virtues of trees. I'm a lumberjack and I go around extolling the virtues of trees in terms of the numbers of rolls of toilet paper they're going to make. So this is at the simplest and amusing level. And of course, there are whole schools of philosophy, if you take Western philosophy, that deal with this very subject about perception, and the whole, the Ding an sich, as the Germans say, the thing in itself. What does that say? What does the tree say it is, So the teacher too needs to be fully understood and needs to almost be able to show the student which way we are going, which way. So lineage, I follow this lineage, and therefore you can expect this of me. It is very tempting for a Westerner who's hung around ashrams and had a bit of this, had a bit of that, to say, oh, well, I could do that. I think I like this. I like that. I like the chanting bit. So yes, I'm going to teach a lot of that. And then there's the Hatha yoga. Yes, I like that too, but not so much as the chanting, And then there's this. So we'll do a bit of that, but we won't do any of this. And of course, we'll all be vegetarian. And then and we add it together and bits and pieces like this. So that is very confusing, and it's something that the unwary student doesn't even know about. But in fact, should be upfront and very clear. I teach this because my teacher taught that, and my teacher added this component, and his teacher added that component, and the teacher before. And it looks as though my role in life as the leader of this is to add just another little element, but this is the lineage. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. Does that answer the question?
Yes, very much so. And I've been part of different lineages too. You mentioned the Shivananda. I took that teacher training when I was 19 years old. And then I went back for karma yoga as well. And you mentioned Lama Lanang, who I actually have met. Very, very synchronistic connection there. And also I've had other teachers who were more shamanic in nature. And what I've been noticing in just the culture, the current culture with regards to lineages and teachers and all stories and corruption, and are coming forward about abuses and these kinds of things within the lineages and from certain teachers. And it seems like almost all teachers, in fact, have some sort of story that's being attached to their lineage. And I just wanted to know, what is your take on that? And have you seen that as well?
Okay. About the misuse of power and corruption, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I think here we have to step back. What we're dealing here with is a huge difference between Eastern and Western culture. In the West, as I explained when I was growing up, for example, we grew up in a world where authority was very distinct and was believed to be what held everything together. And without authority, we would never have beaten the Nazis. You know, without authority, we would never have done this, this, and this, and this. And of course, it's with authority that communism succeeded, as long as it did. It's with authority that Nazism. The free thinking that we have now in the West changes just about everything. And yet, you have Westerners who plunge themselves into, go to India and plunge themselves in traditions where authority is absolutely mandatory. You can't challenge it. Authority is the way that life is structured. And the teacher, the guru, he has the authority that the priest, the cardinal, the pope used to have in our traditions, and we were happy to go along with that. And now we think we know better ourselves, and so we don't bother with that. So it's always rather curious when you find young Westerners who do not want any form of authority over their lives. They've rejected their teachers, they've rejected their parents. I know the best, I've read this, I've looked on YouTube, and so on. And now I'm in India. Oh my God, it's wonderful. Have you heard that teacher? Oh yes, no, I now sit in hours and do this and do exactly what I'm told. No, and I'm not allowed to eat on Fridays. No, I'm not allowed to eat this. No, and it's made me such a much better person, and so on. So suddenly we've given away. But then these lines start to break down. And so what are the expectations of authority? And how does this work exactly? And I think the misuse of power stems from a misuse of understanding. The teacher thinks that they have, well, quite rightly, if they are an Easterner, they think that they come from that sort of tradition. If you're a Westerner who has seen this and then decides to take on the mantle of Swami or Guru, you then assume that you have some sort of authority over your students that in fact nobody's given you, really. Your tradition hasn't given you, because you're not aligned with the tradition. And your students sort of want to give you, and then are a bit surprised when you use it and you appear to abuse it. The other thing with abuse of authority, and I'm not sure if we come that, yes, the power and corruption. And what is that power and corruption? Again, if we look at perhaps the most obvious thing that's happened in terms of what we've called corruption, is the misuse of money and sex. And this also is a very difficult one to follow. In the West, we have very, very distinct views about sexual relationships and about authority powers and sex with younger people, and who they have there's a duty to protect, and so on, and relationships between teachers and students and so on. And now we come to a situation where we have a young Westerner going along and suddenly faced with somebody who beams authority, who beams righteousness, and beams everything that you could never imagine existed, and you are spellbound. You're in a theater of the imagination. You are watching Shakespeare and understanding it fully for the first time, and you are in love with the actors. You are in love with the hero. You fall completely in love. And the day comes when you may be so close to your teacher that it becomes very, very natural then to have sex. And then you wake up a year later and you think, oh my God, I've been abused. Oh, the teacher, da-da-da-da-da-da, you know, he's now sleeping with somebody else, he's doing this and so on. So this might be your version of the facts. The teacher's version of the facts may be something completely different. Is that if you take the whole of the tantric yoga tradition, and I'm not talking just tantric sex, I'm talking about the tradition of the tantric yoga tradition. One of the things that's firmly believed there is that women can elevate their spirituality through sex, and men can elevate their spirituality through less sex. But yet they must be permanently, their aim must be to help their partners to elevate their spirituality through the sex act. So sex is performed, but men do not ejaculate, and the woman is taught to go higher and higher and higher in her sexual experiences. And this is a form of helping the Kundalini to rise. So this is a form of Kundalini yoga in a sense. And the supreme moment for many students is having sex with the guru, and the Kundalini, in fact, can indeed, you know, there can be some extraordinary expressions of the Kundalini, and if it's done properly and carefully and so on and so forth, the woman becomes very, very powerful and can, you know, almost work miracles as a result of being fully empowered sexually in this way. Well, try and explain that to a Western court. I've been abused by the teacher, you know, and then the teacher tries to explain this. You can see the judge sort of, oh yeah, so that's how you do it, is it? You kid them into, and so on. So this is a very, very big misunderstanding. So the teacher is working from one tradition where something is perfectly allowable. He hasn't kidded anybody. He hasn't removed anything from anybody. In fact, he's granted something and given something. And then you've got the teacher over here, the student over here with other expectations. Now, the teacher is no longer an Easterner, but is a Westerner. And he says, oh, well, my Eastern teacher that I learned from 20 years ago used to have sex with his students, so I think I'll have sex with my students. And after all, they do seem to like me, and I'm awfully handsome, and I sit up nicely, and my muscles, I know, are rippling here, you know, and it's always girls in the front, and, you know, the guys are at the back, sort of tutting away a bit, you know, and I know that when I get up and finish my lecture, finish my 2 hours of meditation, leading them and so on, I can see the bliss on their face, and I walk out of the classroom and there they are all trotting after me. I mean, I think I'll pick Susie today and so on and so forth tomorrow. So there's a very, very, very big confusion about all of this and about the sex and spirituality. And in order, the only way to put that into practice is to understand that, is to understand fully the context and exactly what you're letting yourself in for. And there is also confusion. So the brahmacharya, one of the eightfold paths in yoga, as you know, is continence. And this is often read and understood as being that men shouldn't not have sex, like priests and so on. And brahmacharya doesn't actually mean that. It means that you should withhold all your appetites, have the opportunity of marching to extremes. It's just saying withhold your appetites and regain control over them, so that when you are using that particular aspect of your appetite, you know exactly what you're doing. So again, I think this is East-West confusion. And I think also a lot of teachers, you know, it is pure opportunism, quite honestly, we're now in the free Western world. I can have sex with whoever I like. I don't have to get married to them. There's no da-di-da-di-da. So I'll have sex. And suddenly I found myself in court saying I was abused because this was a teacher-student relationship. Well, as a teacher, it didn't seem to be like that to me. You came onto me pretty strongly, and so I thought, well, this is a good thing. No, it had nothing to do with spirituality. I was just having sex with you, like you would if you'd been on a dating site. Huge confusions here, huge confusions and downfalls of many Eastern swamis and gurus who have had very, very good schools and so on, have been brought needlessly down through this misunderstanding. And that does not mean to say that I don't think there has been sexual abuse, because I believe that there has. And I think it's up to the Swami too to understand where the Westerner comes from and what the expectations are and what's going on inside the mind of the student in terms of that. Men in particular who are in positions of power, all their chakras, well, most of them, become alive. They are alive at every part of themselves. Their brain is alive enough to run the United States. Their sense of authority, the third chakra. In the fifth chakra, their sense of aesthetic sense suddenly becomes alive. The heart opens, generosity around the world. So why shouldn't the second chakra become fully alive too? And often it does. And in many traditions, while Clinton was busy having his scandal in the United States, there was the president of France being buried, died and buried, and his wife sitting on one side of the aisle with his children there, and his mistress on the other side of the aisle with her children over there. And the French saying, well, that's, what's the foreign press making all this nonsense about it? He was a man of authority. He was like, so why not? And so these are different expectations, different ways of looking at things. We can turn something into a horror story, which to others is not a horror story. And I'm not condoning any of this. I'm not saying this is right and this is wrong, but one needs to understand and put the thing into its fuller context.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that, and I think that's where, exactly as you say, the confusion comes when East meets West and West meets East. And so there's some exchanges and learnings to take away from all of that. So thanks for answering that one.
And particularly the confusion comes when the Westerner who's been trained in the East comes back and then starts behaving like, or doesn't realize that they're behaving like an Eastern one. And is this appropriate? It may be, or it may be not. Some of the Buddhist ones, are lovely and can behave perfectly as though they were Eastern. And that still, there's some very nice Western Buddhist teachers, who are treated with the same authority and so on that they would be in the East. Yes.
So we're adding in a little note here from Andrew as upon reflection, he felt that he didn't quite clearly share his full perspective on this topic. So, and I quote, in particular reference to what I said to you about swamis and gurus and teachers having sex with students, while in rare cases where I can see benefit, I may have not clearly underlined the fact that I am against the practice. The teacher has a duty of care and a hefty responsibility, and in no case can cross the line and take advantage of the infatuation or vulnerability of the student. And we know that adoration of the student can be a potent aphrodisiac for both, as it is the potency of the fully awake guru. Maureen, my wife, a professional psychiatrist, and I spent many sad hours as elders at yoga schools in helping the women and some men who had believed that they were held closest to the heart of the teacher, had had sex and a relationship, and had now been rejected in favor of the next favored, and so on. Losing a beloved is bad enough, but one who had chosen you as divine consort presents another level of difficulty and overcoming. In the old drawings of tantric practice, it is noticeable that the male students sitting in the circle with the guru each have their own consort on their lap. This is a spiritual lecture about heightening sexual practice in order to achieve a greater sense of divinity. This is not about swapping partners or handing your partner over to the Swami. It is illustrative, more of an idea than a practice. But I am not afraid of the subject of sex and spirituality. And when I teach about sexual practice, solo or couples, I always link sex and the sex act to heightening spiritual awareness. It's important to think of it as part of our sacredness and to prepare for and perform sex as a spiritual practice, I believe. End quote. So when it comes to the subject of enlightenment,
No.
Okay, just no.
No teacher has what? If a teacher tells you they're enlightened, forget it. You know, it's like, it doesn't work like that.
Mm-hmm. And so what has been your experience with that?
Well, I would refer you to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, all right? So just to take it out of the spiritual experience, just so we're not really talking this, but we're talking something which is very similar. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs says that unless the bottom level is satisfied, you know, just like the lower chakras, roof, income, you know, and food and so on. You can't move up to the next level, you can't move. And then the self-realization is at the top of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Finally, when all of this is satisfied, you can start getting to a moment of self-realization. And then he goes on and talks, and Maslow talks about what's the peak of self-realization. And in his words, he is talking about, you know, the ecstasy that comes with enlightenment and so on. And he says one of the characteristics of that is that if you've had that experience, you can't even talk about it for probably 20 years. And even when you can talk about it, you wouldn't. So he, coming from a totally non-spiritual background and so on, made this statement. And from my observations and so on, I would agree wholeheartedly with this. And no spiritual teacher worth his salt will say, I am enlightened. Now, having said that, as you know, and having studied these things, you will know that there are many stages of enlightenment. And the early stages, indeed, you may want to talk to fellow students about and say, well, I had this experience, this is new for me. And suddenly there I was picking flowers in the field or something, and I had this experience, or I was in meditation, or I was doing this, or I was changing the baby's nappy, and suddenly wherever it comes, you know, and had this experience. And a wise teacher will be saying, yes, well, that was number one, you know, because then did this happen, did that? Okay, and this is number two, and so on. But the big bang, the thing at the end, okay, is something different. And yeah, and the teacher does not talk about that one. So if they're talking about enlightenment, they could be talking about to give the teacher their due, yes. But basically, I would have, that any teacher should really avoid that. And if a student says, are you enlightened? The wise teacher smiles and leaves it at that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's a question that you don't answer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
To claim some authority because you're enlightened is...
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with all of your experiences with teachers, it sounds like it was a very rich and enriching, obviously enriching, or else we wouldn't be here chatting. So do you think it's necessary for people to have a spiritual teacher when they're on a spiritual path? Can people also be on the path without a teacher? How can the teachers help the student? How can they hinder the student?
Well, let's just take the second question first. How can they hinder them? The main way that a teacher can hinder the student is by not realizing that the student is more advanced than they are. And that often happens because there are many teachers who've got something really good to tell. And there are many students who take this to heart and practice and practice and practice and practice and learn and read and so on. And yet they may be, even with a guru, they may have to change your guru. You may suddenly realize, it may take you some realization that I am more advanced than my teacher. My teacher no longer has any capacity to teach me. And, thank heavens at school, you're either a high school teacher or you're a university teacher, and you know the difference. But sometimes that is confusing and that is not understood. So that's one of the ways in which, but having said that, having a teacher, I think, is really important, but the teacher must know not only their own field, but beyond their own field, so that they can help, they can see where the student's coming from, and they can say, this is what I teach, and I can help you along this, and I can see where you want to vary it, and wise enough to let them explore, and so on. And for example, I take myself, I make it very clear that I do not teach a path. I have access to all the paths that our discussion has suggested that I have, whether they are Eastern, Western religions, or whether they are all of Western philosophy and a lot of Eastern philosophy and so on and so forth. But what I do is I listen very carefully to the student. I have the capacity, the age, the wisdom that comes with age, to listen to the student and devise the path for them. And then I make sure that they're on their own path, but I'm holding that. I'm holding them while they're doing that bit of the journey. And then they find they're equipped with a number of tools. They've got a tool bag now by the time they're finished with me that can then see them through the next passage and see them through the crisis or see them on for the next few years. So that is, and I think, generally speaking, if you can find the right teacher and you want to go on a spiritual path, it is very, very difficult to do it on your own. You do need somebody who's been there before and somebody wise enough to have formulated something about what's happened to them and to be working within some form of guidelines. So I tell people I'm working within the history of Western philosophy, for example, and how it's developed and where it's arrived to, so I'm not stuck just with Socrates at the beginning, so to speak, but actually taking into account everything else here. And the same with the religious traditions too. So I'm not holding myself up as a particularly brilliant example of this, but yes, to answer your question, you need a teacher and you need a spiritual path. And it's so much easier if you do it that way. Otherwise, you're floundering. You think you found a good thing. And a lot of arrogant people, particularly from the West, imagine that they've got the secret by listening to one tape or having a guided meditation. I'm terribly spiritual. I'm doing this every night I go off and I walk through my field of flowers. And I get these images of, people speaking to me. Oh, it's wonderful. That's my spiritual path, and now I'm channeling, Ezekiel, or I'm channeling Ooga Booga from over here, and I write it down, automatic writing. Yes. I was at Findhorn. I don't know if you've heard of Findhorn, the spiritual community in Scotland, right? Well, I knew Peter and Eileen Caddy when it just started, and I went there, and I wanted to find out what it was like to live in a spiritual community and find out And subsequently, we started one ourselves in Canada. And on this course with, and I was one evening with Eileen Caddy. There was a couple who come from Australia, and suddenly the lad said, well, we've come really because of my wife. You know, they're both aged about 22, and said, we didn't know where to turn in the whole world. We didn't know where to go, but we heard about you as a spiritual teacher and this community that's just starting. We had to come here because what happens is that my wife does this extraordinary thing. She sits and suddenly this sort of goes into this funny fog, and then she starts writing. And, you know, if you read what she's written, it's beautiful. We hardly dare show it to somebody. It is so beautiful and meaningful and precious and so on. And so that's why we've come. We wanted some guidance and help. And Eileen turned to them and said, welcome, you found the right place. We all do that here. So this is so, you know, and at this precious moment, they'd found the teacher that they needed, you know, from floundering on their own, wondering what this was all about. And she just said, not, I will be your teacher or whatever. Yeah, oh, welcome. We all do that here. That's so lovely, so beautiful. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So in your being with all these teachers that you have been with, how did you know it was time to leave each?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think I probably didn't. It was somebody else who gave me a boot up the backside, and sometimes it just happens. You know, with the John Main Christian meditation teaching, you can keep that all your life. So it's something that you didn't have to necessarily belong. Although a friend of mine helped to start the movement, and there are chapters across Canada and elsewhere in the world now, Christian meditation. And so it was that sort of thing we could move in. But when you've committed your life, and in Thailand, for example, we had done 22 out of 24 months of training there. So this is not training to be a teacher. I'm talking about spiritual, this is like going to university, all right? And this is probably the most profound teaching you're ever going to find anywhere in the world. Deep, looking into all the deities, every aspect of absolutely everything, every aspect of every hatha yoga posture and what it means, and why the breath going with that, the pranayama, why the chanting appropriate to this posture, to this chakra, and why that was important, and so on and so on, and deeper and deeper and deeper. And then it was in that case, because I was also the business advisor to the Swami, helping to develop the place from a business point of view, because I was a businessman, and I was constantly falling out. I've been falling out with the Swami since the day I came. I was always challenging. He was up for the fight, I can tell you, and it was. And you've got to be pretty tough if you're going to fight me, I can tell you. And and you had to be pretty tough if you're going to fight the Swami. So we had this vivid, living relationship, which you could see people were enjoying, because they were seeing that this guy, if the Swami was being challenged by somebody, And so anyway, this was very good. In the end, it was a friend who had gone to India to study under the Swami there, the Kriya Yoga, Shankarananda, that he said, come on, Andrew and Maureen, it's time to move and time to move. So it was a beckoning. It was a time to move, and I'm glad we did. I'm really glad we did. And a few years later, scandal hit that school, unfortunately, and so yeah. How else did I know? I think I would like to have maintained the relationship with Kripalu, and I think that if you look at if you know anything about Amrit Desai and what happened to him, he was thrown out from the school there because of having had a sexual relationship with one of the students, which is something, in my view, should never have happened. That was appalling behavior, and but not so much on his part, but on the part of the board of directors. Anyway, that's another story. And I've never really left Kripalu Yoga in my heart, because I view their system of Hatha Yoga as being so excellent. There is always a good reason, and if you know yourself well enough and you read the signs, you know it's time to move on. Yeah.
And Andrew, who is it that decides? Is it the student that decides? Is it the teacher that decides, or is it both? What do you think about that?
Well, in my experience, it's usually the teacher, usually the student that decides. It's very seldom that a teacher says, this isn't for you. It would be a very wise teacher that would do that. And I'm sure there are wise teachers that say, you're doing the wrong thing. This is not for you. You'd be better off studying that, you know. I mean, if you got a Vipassana, I have a friend who's got a sort of Vipassana approach, and she's not really concerned very much about all the other aspects. She wants the pure Vipassana meditation, and the meditation, you know, in the here and now, in every movement of the body or whatever. And so that's enough for her. That's all she wants. So she likes meeting the other people and so on and so forth. It's not her cup of tea. And it's a bit like, I suppose, in a sense, I mix it up. I find I'm senior enough, if you know what I mean, to know. I spend my winters in Mexico at one of the ashrams. Oh, at a teacher I didn't mention, who is actually my favorite teacher, an old friend of mine. Yes, Sahajananda, and an ashram and meditation center there. And he has another one now in France, a huge one. So I spend my winters there, and also in Oaxaca City. And in Oaxaca City, there are more churches than days of the week. And I like to meditate. So I go into the church, you see, and I do an Eastern meditation inside the Catholic Church, because I feel at home there. I feel completely at home in the church environment, and I can feel the thousands of years of prayers and hope and desperation and love and marriage and christening, and it's all inside, it's all in the buildings, you know, that you can feel it there. There's wonderful places to be. And then it's so then occasionally I go into one of the churches and they're holding mass, you know, so I join in the mass. Now I'm not allowed to take the host because I'm not Catholic, you know. So traditionally, if you're not, you can line up and receive a blessing. So I line up, take my blessing, and then some of the priests there won't take no for an answer. They're going to give me the host whether I like it or not. So I take the host, and they've won the day. They've got me. So I'm happy. I've done my meditation. I've had my communion, and I've received. So I've done my chanting, and yeah. But I know what I'm doing. I mean, the point is, I'm not being confused by all this. I'm just relishing the different tastes, you know. Yeah. And my guru of choice right now is Sahajananda at Hridaya Yoga, if anybody wants to look it up, or you can ask me for the details. And I think that he has got the absolute perfect balance for East and West. He's a profoundly spiritual man, and he very, very good teacher indeed. Yes, yeah. He bases his teaching on Ramana Maharshi, who asks the question, "Who am I?" And the meditation is done on the basis of "Who am I? Who am I?" That's your call. That's your mantra. And of course, it's a question you can never answer, but it pulls you in. And it's very sensitive. It's very well done. Lots of loving teachers, profound, very, very good. Modern, wonderful teaching. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, that brings me, you said the word modern there. With all of, this variance of teachers that are available, and like you say, this teacher is modern and according to your critique is high up there and in the status of being a great teacher. And for the rest of us who perhaps haven't had quite as extensive research into all of these departments, what would you suggest for us to be aware of or to look at when we are looking at a teacher or feel that draw to seek a teacher?
Well, it's the old question, is it the singer or the song? And I think quite often we get confused by these things, and that, a lot of people have deserted Catholicism simply because of the singers, and they've forgotten that and because the singers can be put under spotlights and television cameras and the past's dragged up and so on. But what really matters is the song. What simply matters is the words of Jesus, who cut through Judaism and so on and so forth, and simply said, it's not a God of this and this and this, it's a God of love. And so you're drawn to, it's all about love. So you're drawn to the core. If you're looking for a teacher, if you're trying to find a teacher, you must be drawn to the song. And then you've got to find a singer who sings it particularly well. The easy way in the West is to be drawn to the singer, because the singer does a good job of doing it, and because your friend said, oh, you must come and listen to Susie or Swami, whatever, teaching and this sort of thing. And I think it's what you're looking for. And the other thing too is to remember that life is a pilgrimage. We are on a pilgrimage, and so there are various stages to that pilgrimage. So it's both a personal journey of a pilgrimage through life, experiencing the richness, the ups and downs, the sideways, the bog, the lakes we have to swim, the mountains we have to climb, the people we need to love, the children that we have, all of everything that comes into life. And we have to stop and we have to help the villagers heave the wagons out of the mud. But if we perceive that it's a journey, if it's a perceive that evolution is not something that happened before we were born up to us, that is involution. Evolution is what's happened with us. We are evolution. And as we change, so we leave the world a changed place. We need to understand that we have a fundamental role to play in helping the world to evolve. And when we realize that when we leave this mortal coil, when we leave this world, and our journey is complete, we will have left it a better place than we came, and we will return to source, however we define that. And our very essence and our very soul must return to source. So if we understand that these are the basic building blocks and the elements, we can bring this to bear on the people who are likely to teach us. Are they going to help us on this journey? Do they too understand that this is what it's all about? And indeed, I may go to my yoga classes and just do some physical exercises because I'm fed up with going to the gym, or I'm fed up with Pilates. But if I'm looking for a real teacher, somebody who's going to teach me, then make sure they are a proper teacher, and make sure that the priest that you go to, the Catholic priest, understands more than the mass and the words and so on, and more than being just a conveyor of bringing the society together. That too is vital, to be part of a group that brings and helps other people in the village, in the town. But beyond that is your journey, and you may need help in defining what it is you want to find at this particular point of your journey. So you had to bring all those elements to bear to decide who is going to be my teacher. And there are lots and lots of wonderful teachers around the world. But finding them and shopping for them is a much more difficult path. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. At this juncture in my personal journey and exploration in this project, and in a greater sense as well, as far as looking at spiritual teachers, gurus, communities, spiritual communities, I question if it's even possible to have one. And however, your answer here that you've given is it says yes. It says yes, and to be clear about what it is that we're, as a student of life, looking for in that teacher. So you've answered my last question before I even asked it.
On the other hand, it's very difficult. Where's the shopping list?
Yes,
it's like, where's the catalog? Where's where's the Amazon that I can click on and look down? So anyway, for the intimacy of these gatherings and so on, if anybody wants to come to me, even just for one session, in order to answer that question, and that would be that's all. Though I'll offer more, but that's not what I'm here for. But in order to help people answer that question, if they wanted to come and sit with me in my room and in my meditation room here and so on, I'd be very welcome to receive them, just to examine that question: is what sort of teacher, what sort of path? This is what I believe now, and I think there's something for me in this direction and in this direction. How do I knit that together? What should I be doing next? I'd be very happy to help them to answer that question. I won't answer it for them, but I'd be happy to point them in and give them some guidance in that respect. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I thank you for that, because that is precisely the role of the elder. And the reason why I wanted to call this series of interviews Elder Speaks is because in our culture, we don't really have that connection so much. In Native American cultures, it is very much part of their old traditions, being of European descent in North America. It hasn't really been part of my upbringing at all. So there is, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. So thank you for offering that, because that is precisely, some people may be getting exactly what they need just from hearing the wisdom, and then some people may have more and want to explore that further with an elder that they resonate with, a teacher that they resonate with. So thank you so much for bringing that forward also.
Well, here I am, and I leave it up to you if anybody should be interested to come through you and to come to me. I'm not here to advertise anything, and
advertising your wisdom.
Well, thank you, and so it's been a very great pleasure doing this. Is there anything else you wanted to ask me?
Is there anything else that you would like for us to know?
The only thing that comes to mind is that I think this is a splendid series of questions that you're asking, and very, very pertinent. And they show me, they demonstrate to me, you have come from a place of deep meaning to a place with some big question marks in it. And I think that the fact that you're not just sitting and chewing on these things, but taking them out and asking for help and so on is enormously beneficial to lots and lots of people. And I hope lots of people watch this or however you present it and so on. It's very, 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 very important. And there's nothing more dreadful than a lost soul that on a spiritual path, somebody who's tried in earnestness and may have put university courses or life or marriages or who knows what on hold and followed a teacher and suddenly woken up 5-10 years later and realized not only has the teacher taken all their money, but actually they think the teacher's a bit of a scoundrel. And this is deeply, deeply traumatic and something to be avoided at all costs. And so we need to help people like that very much indeed. Yes, yes.
Mm-hmm. And, yes, and quite a few are rising.
Yes, and I think it's a shame. I think that there is, teachings are available, and for people who won't take you for a ride and who won't sucker you in and aren't obliging you to believe what you don't necessarily want to believe or whatever, that will work with you. And yeah. Mm-hmm. So well done. Yeah, keep it up. Keep up the good work. Yeah, quite an elder yourself. Yes.
Well, thank you again, Andrew.